Welcome back to another Interactive Brokers Python API client series library. I don't know, something like that. All right, so what did we cover in our last video? Well, we were starting to get more into the meat of the actual client. So just defining certain things when it came to, how do we think about this session? How do we think about this whole process of making and sending requests and then receiving those requests? And we kind of still saw, there's still kind of opportunity to improve it, but generally the framework is there. And we're kind of approaching things the way we think we should be approaching them. And, at this point, I would say we feel relatively comfortable, I would think, in the sense of, okay, we're going to create this session. What is this going to look like? In the sense of we understand that there's kind of different components that we're calling in this kind of like master create session thing. Well, one is connecting to it. So we've got to connect to our server. So I don't know. I don't know if connect is the right word, and I've debated whether that's the best name for it, but I look at it as you're connecting to the server, you're connecting to the API. And then from here, we have this set server. So basically you can have multiple accounts associated with your login. Which account do I set to the server? So that method will be handling that. And then additionally, we have is authenticated. So this is a mechanism where I check to see if that current session is authenticated. And if it is, then what I do is I change the status, obviously, and then I set the server. If it's not, then I connect to the API again, but I don't actually start up the server again. So a little confusing. I'm pretty sure there's some naming convention that could be changed, but really all you want to think about is we want to make sure that the server or the gateway is running in the background. Once we know that, we're going to try to connect to the API. When we connect to the API, we then have to authenticate the session, or we have to check if that session is authenticated, and then we can proceed on into other requests and ideally data request. So what we're going to do now that we have this kind of create session framework, we're going to define the connect method. So that's part of our class. We're going to use the self keyword. And then additionally, we have a start server argument that by default will be true. The only time this really comes into handy is down here, where I specifically know the server is running in the background, so I don't need to start it. I can just quote unquote connect to it. So all this is going to do is we're going to say, all right, connects the session to the interactive broker API by starting up the client portal gateway, prompting, can I type tonight? Prompting the user to log in, and then returns the results back to the create session method. All this is going to return as a Boolean. You'll see that in the doc string. Okay, so first we're going to assume if start server is set to true. Here comes the fun part. So remember up here, long while ago, we talked about the operating system. So this is an important property that we're going to now leverage. Depending on the operating system that we're on, we have to change how we connect to the client portal gateway. So if the operating system that we're currently working with is Windows, then we're going to define a list, and we're going to call it iWeb_API, and we'll do proc. It's going to be short for process. And we're going to pass through some command line arguments. The first one is command. The next one is K. This one, if I remember correctly, is to pass through command line arguments, if I remember correctly. And the next one is going to be the location of our bat file, so our Windows batch file. And then our second one will be our root configure.yaml file. Now, normally when you read the documentation, they want you to run these commands manually. So they want you to run these from the command line. I'm doing that on your behalf. So I'm defining the commands that I have to run, and I'm basically handling running them and creating a new process using the Windows 32 platform. So if Windows, use the command line application. Here, define the command line arguments. Okay, then from here, what are we going to do? We're going to create a new process. Now, it's important to keep in mind that inherently, if we're calling this method when we're defining start server, that means that the server process was none to begin with. So this is going to create a new server process that's then attached to this property. Now, in this case, we're going to say subprocess, and then we're going to do popen. So basically, open a new process. There's some arguments that we can pass through. Those arguments will basically be the arguments that we defined right up above. And then we're going to define the current working directory. The current working directory is going to be the self.client portal folder. And then from here, I'm just going to close this for the time being. And then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm also going to have another argument called creation flags. And then this is going to be subprocess create new council. And then all I want is the process ID from this new process. So here, spin up a new process that will be our client portal gateway. Again, it might not look complicated, but this is doing a lot in the sense of we now have this background process. Again, think of a process as, again, it's just an operation that you're doing on your system. We're just creating a new operation, a new process on our system. It's its own process. It's distinct from this one, other than the fact of we're just grabbing the process ID. This will create a new window, so a new console terminal. It's going to make sure that the current working directory that we're talking about is the one we're currently on. And then it's going to run these arguments that we define. All these arguments are doing is they're just starting the server. That's it. So that's if it's Windows. If it's not Windows, so else if self operating system equals, and I thought it was funny, they call it Darwin. Wasn't ready for that one. We're basically doing the same thing, but really all we're doing is we're just changing a couple things about it. So in this case, instead of command, it's going to be open, and it's going to be F. There's an extra one called A, well, -A, and then it's going to be terminal, and then in this case, it's going to be a shell script. We're going to flip this around. We're going to flip that around. And then that's pretty much it. So all we're doing here is we are opening the terminal and we're running it. And then the other thing that I turn off here is I do not create a new console in this situation. I actually keep it in the background. I tested this with my friend. It was weird. His automatically opened a new one in the background, which I thought was weird. But I might do a little bit more testing on this one. Unfortunately, I kind of have to wait till my friends are free because I don't have a Mac. I mean, I guess I could get like one of those AWS instance, but I'm cheap. All right, but that's basically all this is doing. Again, all the connection is really doing is if we need to start the server, it's just going to check the operating system that we're on. Once we do that, we know how to spin up a new process, and we'll just have it in the background. Then from here, what we're going to do is there's a bunch of stuff I have to print out, but it's really straightforward, but I don't want to type it all because it takes a while. So I'm just going to copy it. Excuse me. So from here, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to now save the server state. Save the server state because we now have the process ID. And then from here, we're going to basically just print out a bunch of stuff, which are supposed to be instructions of telling the user where to go. And so in this case, all I'm really doing is I'm just saying, hey, go here, log in. I'm letting them know which process ID this is running on, and then I'm just putting in some line breaks. That's all. So line break, redirect URL, and then, oh, sorry. And then if I can get over it, the process ID. Now, keep in mind, I have actually had this where I've automated the redirect component as well. I'm debating if I want to put that back in here. I felt like it redirected you a little bit too quickly, or is it more of like an aggressive redirect in the sense of I want to make sure people know that the steps they need to take. And so part of it is have the URL, and then once they have that URL, then they can go with it. And then also I was having some issues too with the Mac, like doing that on the Mac, but then we figured it out. So of course that happens, right? And then from here, what we're going to do is below this is we're going to say while self.authenticated equals false. So basically we're just taking this one right up here, right? It's just checking that one. So we're going to say keep doing something while we're not authenticated. So we're going to ask for the user input, and we're going to say input. Would you like to make an authenticated request? Now I can word this a little bit better, and so I will be, but for right now, I'm just going to keep it the way it is. In this case, yes or no, put my little space, and then I want it to all be upper, so I'm going to call that upper method. So again, keep going while I'm not authenticated. And then we're going to say ask the user if they want to try and authenticate. Very simple, right? Okay, and once we've done that, we're going to say, okay, well, assuming the user is being nice to us, and assuming the user input is equal to no, then what we're going to do is we're going to say self.close session. So basically, we're going to be defining a method that will clear the current process. It will shut it down, and it will terminate the script. So if they say no, terminate the process and close everything down. That's all that was going to do. Ooh. Oh no. Hold on. Sorry, I mixed up my notes. Okay, I think that's the right one. Yeah, I think that's the right one. Okay, so if user input is no, otherwise we're going to make a authenticated response. So we're going to say auth response, which is self is authenticated. And so in this case, we're going to say, okay, let's do that. And then we're going to say if status code in auth response dot keys and auth response dot status code is basically equal to 401, then basically that means we're not authenticated. So that's the important thing, is if status code in auth response dot keys. And the other situation is, okay, then self dot authenticated equals false. So, and then next, elif authenticated in auth response dot keys. And why am I doing this to myself? I have the thing right here. There we go. We're just doing exactly what we did before. We're basically just calling that again. Now, part of it too is I've kind of debated whether this probably should be its own method. So there is a likelihood where I might reduce this a little bit more, because again, normally if I see an opportunity to kind of condense something, I might, but sometimes I like to keep it a little bit more straightforward, just not to confuse myself, to put it nicely. So there's an opportunity maybe here to even reduce this down a little bit further, where when we're calling this endpoint, maybe it makes sense to just check for this stuff when we're calling that endpoint, just to, again, maybe make the process a little bit easier. That's my opinion. Some people might say, hey, actually, it makes sense to kind of keep it separate. It's kind of, it's, some people might prefer that. I guess it's kind of up to you, right? All right. Assuming I've spelled everything correctly. And then basically, once we've done that, we do want to return true. So again, let's just kind of recap, because there's a lot going on here in this particular method. First thing we're going to do is, if necessary, start the server. And then what I need to do is actually need to indent this out a little bit more. Sorry, I need to put that out a little bit more. So if start the server, then basically start it up using the subprocess, but we do need to make sure we understand which operating system we're on. Depending on the operating system, it's going to change the arguments we have to pass through in that new subprocess. Then once we've done that, then what we're going to do is we're going to save the state. So that's the assumption that we need to start up the server. If we don't start up the server, then we're just going to jump right down here. But for both, we're going to still do everything below this line. So even if we're starting it or we're not starting it, both of these will still be done. We'll still do this section. All we're doing is we're asking the user to go to a particular URL, log in, and then once they see client login succeeds, it means they're good to go. And then all I want them to do is just say yes, they would like to make an authenticated request. So all this is going to keep doing is it's going to keep a while loop where it's going to keep going until this property down here is changed to true. If it's never changed to true, it's just going to keep asking until they say no, at which point when they say no, it will actually terminate the session. Now, technically here, I should be a little bit more clear on that and saying, hey, if you keep saying yes, it's going to keep going. If you say no, it will terminate the session. So again, there is an opportunity to make this a little bit more clear, I think, for the user, but all we're doing is we're asking them, would they like to make an authenticated request? If they would, then we're going to make that request to that endpoint. We're going to check to see if it was successful. If it wasn't successful, we're going to set it equal to false. It's going to ask them again, and so on and so on. So there's probably more I could do to maybe terminate this early, or maybe asking them to, check to see if we logged in or something like that, or limit the number of times they can repeat to maybe like 3. But for right now, this is kind of how it is. But then also, if it was a successful authentication, then what I'm going to do is I say, okay, now we have an authenticated session, just keep on going. So basically, you can now exit the connect method. That's basically all we're going to be doing. Now, Since we kind of talked about it up here, which is closing the session, what would closing the session look like? Well, it's actually not that hard. In this one, I think it's a little bit surprising how easy it is. In this particular method, all we're going to do is close the existing session and terminate the client portal. So this is going to handle a couple things. It's going to kill the terminal, and it's going to delete the state, and it's going to exit the script for you. So first, let's print some stuff out for the user. Print and closing server and exiting script. Bam. And then from here, first thing we're going to do is kill the process. So we're going to say return code equals subprocess dot call. And then it's going to be task kill. And then it's / PID. And then it's just the process ID, which is going to be, this case, format self.server process. And then we're going to do creation flags equals subprocess detached head. No, detached process. And then from here, we're going to delete the state. So we're going to say self.server state is going to be action delete, which will delete the JSON file. And then finally, exit the main script. And so from here, we're going to do system.exit. Why doesn't it like that? Is something wrong with it? Int? Oh, no, now it's fine. I don't know. I guess it was IntelliSense. But yeah, that's closing the session. How much time? Okay, so I went up on this one too. All right, so that does it for this video. Again, just kind of to recap. We talked about connecting to the API, starting up the server using subprocess, and then handling the initial authentication process. And then additionally, we talked about closing the existing session. So at this point, again, we've got a lot of what I would say we need to kind of get started. I think at this point, we can now kind of start doing one last thing, which is basically set the server. And then next we can build the couple needed requests in order to actually authenticate the session. Because at this point we have a framework, but we don't actually have the endpoints that we need to hit in order to do that. But again, I think initially we have enough to kind of get us started. But at the same time, hopefully you're kind of seeing some stuff you're going, maybe we can simplify some of this. Maybe we can improve some of it. Because there's definitely an opportunity here to make this a little bit more robust. And so I'm all open, share your thoughts. If you think there's a better way to do it, by all means. I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but I'm always curious to see what other people are thinking when they're kind of looking through this. They might be going, hey, Alex, you should be doing this. I'm like, oh, all right. I like it. Alrighty. So thanks again for watching, everybody. We will see you in the next video.